Hold on, up to you.
Oh,
Very good.
all right. This is my public comment. And she was thrilled to see half of my lawn going native. She loved it. And she gave me a hint that was a lot easier for the spring than what we were told about ripping up grass. She actually does not recommend that to her clients. She tells them to mow down to as low as the blade can go, which will mimic a natural fire for the grass. And then and to do that after the growing season has stopped. So after everything has basically gone to seed and stopped growing.
Give it the number 0 buzz cut.
Exactly, like down to the ground as if it was on fire. And then when the spring snow starts to melt and it looks fairly reasonable that, you're gonna have a full melt, sprinkle the wildflower seeds on top of the snow, because that will hydrate the seeds, and as the snow melts, it will fill into the nooks and crannies of the grass and the sod. And wildflower seeds and, prairie seeds will basically take root instead of having to like do a full planting from dirt. She actually said, don't disturb the sod because the sod is preventing a lot of the sort of weed species, the dormant weeds from taking root. And so if you disturb that sod, you're actually encouraging weed growth. And so that's why she says, cut it down to 0 and then plant the prairie seeds in the snow
The melting snow.
and in the melting snow.
That makes sense.
That's
Yeah.
really cool.
It really did. So I wanted to share that with this committee because it seemed very different from the recommendations that we received in the spring, but a lot easier for people to actually do. And so if anyone's letting their lawn go native, cut it to 0 in a couple of weeks.
So I have done that before, not for replanting wildflowers, but because I had a whole bunch of crabgrass or something, and it worked. I will say that it's not quite as simple as just dropping your blade all the way down on the ground, because the lawnmower just gets completely choked up. So you have to do it in gradations.
Yeah.
Go down to 2 inches and mow it, and then go down to 1 inch and then drop it all the way down.
I was
But
very
yes.
much expecting that, Eric. Yeah, it's gonna be a mess for me. It's gonna take a
Yeah.
while. Cool.
Makes me wonder about, I mean, the Energy Committee does articles in the green issue of the Observer every month. And that might be a cool article for
Yeah.
us to look to put
That'd be cool.
something in like February, March, when
Mhm.
people are starting to think about spring. It's too late for the mowing, so maybe if we want to include mowing down low, you'd have to, I guess, do it in November or something, but that's a cool strategy.
Yeah.
Or maybe we could try it and see if it works and then write it
Yeah,
out.
there you go. There you go.
Before recommending
There you
it.
go.
Okay, that sounds like a good
Yeah.
idea.
She's actually gonna send me some prairie seeds in the mail, and then, that'll be fun. I'll let you guys know, and I'm gonna drop it to 0 probably in 2 weeks.
Wow.
It's gonna take me all weekend.
Only, right? Not Midwestern prairie seeds.
What's that, Kim?
Native to Vermont only, right?
Oh,
Not-
yeah. Oh, yeah. All right, next, are there any other public comments?
We don't have any members of the
I don't
public
see any, so let's move to the agenda, or I'm sorry, the minutes.
I had uh, two suggested updates to it. One was in 5.4. End of the third line, it says, Reed said he thinks that the WCC needs to invest in maintenance before they explore maintaining trails. I think it means before they explore expanding trails.
Expanding, yeah. I saw that one too.
And then, let's see, there's one more. Um, Oh, yeah, second to last line of 5.6. The committee discussed how much to money to request. Just the word "to" just has to come out. And that was all I noticed when I read it last night.
Thank you.
Great, can we get a motion to approve?
I'll move to approve as amended.
I'll second.
Great. All in favor of approving the minutes as amended?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, I. No.
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 All right. One dissenter of
Yeah,
younger age.
one dissenter. Any abstentions?
I'll abstain since I wasn't here.
Okay, great, thanks. We'll say it carries to approve. And we will move to the next item on the agenda, which is the ERF budget memo. Which I believe is updated from prior memos. In fact, it still has the date. But I'll leave this to Andrew.
Looked like maybe just the green was updated or the chart.
Ah, yes.
Yeah, so I went through and just highlighted things to update. Some of them are very simple, like taking Simon's name off there, unfortunately. But yeah, I did update the ERF balance quickly and scrolled down. I did add the amount, the $40,000 to the ERF to that graph. I didn't update it to 2024 values. Didn't think it was super necessary because the change in the trend lines wouldn't have been significant.
Yeah,
Um,
the adjustment for inflation over
Right.
time, yeah.
Right.
Adjusting to 2023 is just about as good as adjusting to
Mhm.
2024 for right now.
Yeah.
I would agree.
but updated that and then yeah, I think that mainly if there is interest in adding more detail in there about penny on the rate, that was sort of what we discussed.
Mhm.
And I did just throw in the very basic penny on the tax rate calculation to the bottom and let me
Where
know
did you
if
find
it's-
that? 'Cause I was like researching it and I found lots of information where people reference using it, but very few people who could explain where it comes from.
So, yeah, basically just took the total grand list value. Matt had given me that number. I'm not sure, can't cite my source on where Matt got that number. But you take the 2.15 billion, the tax rate is calculated at $100 per grand list value, so you divide by 100. And then you take 1% of that. And so $215,000 is what a penny would be. And yeah. So I really, I think some of these highlights are things that it could be changed very easily. Some of them are things that I can do, changing dates, fiscal years, that sort of thing. I think your discussion should center around any additions and adjustments you think that should be made to requests. Targets for how much you want in the ERF. And yeah, that's not to say that you might have other ideas as well. But you had also discussed maybe having a member or two work on drafting something. I wanted to give you enough time to try to make a good dent in that today. And Dave, we kind of talked about giving this a good amount of time.
Yeah. I think, so we do have a good amount of time. We have into the 8 o'clock hour. So this is pretty,
It's hefty.
it can be if we want it to be. I think the main topics that I think we probably want to talk about are making clear that recommendation is if we want to change that, and then the big change is having a discussion about the penny on the tax rate. Those would be the two areas. Are there any other topics in this memo that people feel strongly we want to talk about today? Eric is the primary author from last year. Is there anything you want to call to attention?
So thanks, Dave. I think, so last year, just for everyone's memory, and I guess Andrew wasn't here, so just for Andrew's benefit. Also, we restructured the memo last year, to be bullet forward, more detailed information later in the memo, if that makes sense. Which we sort of achieved. We just ended up, but we ended up with a lot of bullets at the top of the memo. The goal was to, highlight the key points for our argument, for the allocation to the ERF. So I guess my suggestion would be to think about, reduce the number of bullets with stronger emphasis on the bullets that we have that we do keep. And I think the chart is great. I've been trying to think about different ways to illustrate that information, but haven't come up with anything.
I feel like that yellow trend line needs to be a red trend line.
Yeah, maybe
So awkward.
maybe make the columns blue or something, and the downward, the downward trend line, make that bright red.
Just that's the piece that bugs me, is that yellow line.
Yeah, and then it's interesting, the depending on the tax rate calculation at 215,000. That'd be great if we could actually get that, but we know we're not. So, maybe we need to consider requesting half a penny on the tax rate or something to look a little bit more fiscally responsible. I don't know. Just those are my thoughts.
All right. Thank you, Eric. Any other people want to weigh in on what should be focused on for this discussion, at least?
If you go back up to the bullets, as Eric mentioned, there are a lot of them. You know, the first three are, I think, or the first two anyway, are, I think the select board has seen that before, so I think putting out there about the Community Resilience and Biodiversity Protection Act as the first thing might be better, and then also the RF as a powerful tool to leverage external funds.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
I was sort of thinking the same thing, Laura, that some of the non-monetary items
Yeah,
or qualitative items that we have in here they've heard year after year, and so they should be in the memo, but they don't need to be the leading item.
right.
Select board membership changes, though. I mean, it's not always the same people, so it's not a terrible idea to, stay emphasized. Didn't we just have a major change?
What if we like, so I've been doing this in grant applications where I am like, I just realized that reviewers don't actually read the entire grant.
Right.
And I feel so I've started not highlighting, underlining and bolding just like key things. And I do it really sparingly, but the stuff that I'm like, that needs to get read. Right. And like sometimes like the main point is under a lot of text because you need to set the background up or whatever. I've like started bolding and underlining that stuff. And so I'm just like wondering if maybe like it isn't necessarily like the removal of bullet points or the rearranging of bullet points, but like of like subsections of the points, like maybe everything that's yellow right now gets an underline. I'm not sure.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's an interesting idea. Just to build off of that, another approach would be to lead each bullet with bolded text that like drives home the point with
Yeah,
like a
that's a
sentence
great idea.
supporting it behind that bolded text.
Right, yeah, like if it's like something bold, that's the point, like minimal words, colon, and then the text that follows is an explanation. So that people can be, when they're like, what do you mean? Wah, then they can, I don't know why I gave people that voice.
Like, so like the two for the third bullet point about being a powerful tool to leverage external funds could just say like 2-for-1 ROI, and then that would be like the leading thing, and then it would have a sentence after it. So what you're saying,
Yeah,
Eric?
exactly.
Well, yeah,
Exactly.
that's a good idea.
I don't know what they should all be, but I think that approach is, I don't know, it just like helps people who are either reading really fast or like don't actually have time to read completely, which I have realized is almost everybody.
Yeah, and then state mandated Biodiversity Protection Act and explain why we wanna help with that.
Curious, how many of these memos does the select board get this time of year?
During budget season, they're looking at the whole thing.
Right.
Yeah, probably a lot.
Yeah, a lot.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
They're probably getting at least one per department head about like what's important for the next fiscal year, plus we're special because we have the ERF.
Mhm,
Other committees don't really have a fund except for the housing committee.
mhm. Making it easier to read for them is, I think, key, even
Yeah.
if we keep everything in there.
I mean, I will say that the underlined first sentence in that is, or the, I guess, second sentence, you know, does have that main ask, which is you don't need to read anymore. If you at least see that, so
True.
you know, I support keeping something like that still in the
Mhm.
document, just very clearly, boom, there it is, 150,000. Okay, so let's talk about that number for a minute. Is that still our request? Do we have any justification for increasing or lowering that request, or is it better to be consistent? That's kind of what I would think we could target a discussion around.
Yeah. I think I just want to confirm I heard correctly. So the green 480,000, that is the current balance in the RF.
correct.
Okay.
So, we had asked, historically, we had asked for 100,000 for the previous fiscal year. And we got 50.
Mhm.
And so then we said, well, now we're behind 50,000, so let's go ahead and ask for the whole, that was us trying to be budget conscious. We knew that they were gonna balk a little bit, 150,000, given what they had been funding it at. So then we said, all right, well, we'll be reasonable and just ask for 100, but we only got half of that. So then we said, all right, well, now we're even further behind. We should ask for 150, like we think is the full amount we need on an annual basis, and then we got 40. So
Yeah,
it's
Is that what we got in the last budget, was 40?
Yeah.
Okay.
so
we
it
were
was
lucky to
like,
get 40.
Yeah,
yeah, so we asked for more and got less. I don't know whether asking for more prevented it from being cut even further, because a lot of stuff got cut and we managed to maintain 40, so maybe that was almost a success in a way, which is hard to believe, but my view is that going forward, we should not hide that what we believe is the true cost to achieve what we're trying to do. We should just ask for it, and I
Mhm.
think I would be in favor of the next memo having two funding options for the select board to consider, because I know there's other potential penny on the tax rate related proposals brewing, with the housing fund, bike ped infrastructure. So I think putting, in my mind, after what we just talked about, how much a penny on the tax rate would be, either saying we're requesting 150,000 again, because that's how much was calculated to meet our 30% by 2050. So we were doing 30 by 2050. And that was gonna be 150K a year roughly to achieve. We're a little behind now. Let's see, that's 40 and 50 is 90 out of the 300K we should have raised over the last 2 years, so we're already 200,000 short of where we wanted to be.
Do we wanna add a bullet that states the select board has underfunded this by 100,000 per year or 50,000 per year? To something, some type of statement that says, you know, this request, the full request has not been met for the last 2 years, and you know, we are asking to reinstate full funding at 150.
I think
Something-
that there's some way to, I think yes, and we would just have to like wordsmith how we do it, right? Like funding has been on pause. I like reinstate, right? Like as if it's like the levels were not a change that's going to continue, but rather like we've been waiting and now it's time sort of message, right? Like I'd hate for it to be interpreted as like, oh, we decided not to do that anymore.
Yeah,
Yeah, basically, we're trying to return to like the 2000s. In the 2000s, we were getting somewhere in the range of 1 to 1.5, 100 to 150 K. That's basically what we're asking for, is to return to the funding levels prior to 2010. So maybe that's a way to do it, and also direct their attention to the chart. Maybe a bullet point that says, recent funding has fallen short of what's required to achieve our conservation goals. The WCC requests that funding return to to levels prior to 2010. C chart. Something like that. But what I was gonna say in general is I think we should be, because we know there are other paying the tax rate type proposals being considered. I think saying 150 is what we've been asking for, and we maintain, if we still agree that that's the right value, based on the assessment that was done 2 years ago, I think. Or a half a penny on the tax rate combined with other dedicated funding stream proposals either would get us much closer to our goal than we are today.
right?
Mhm.
And I feel like a half a penny on the tax rate is much more likely to be seen favorably, because if they're gonna try to sort of piece together, well, maybe we're gonna do a penny on the tax rate, but we're gonna split it 3
Mhm.
ways.
So
Yeah.
penny on a tax rate's not gonna get much, so like, I actually think that if we're gonna do something like that. We should make our request in comparison to what. A penny would, you know, is it a half a penny, is it a quarter, you know, is it? Because ultimately, if what you're saying plays out. And the council ends up thinking about like, you know. 5 pennies on the tax rate for public benefit programs or something like that, then the ERF would be a known quantity for how much is needed to fill
Right,
it.
so half a penny to me is the bottom, is the floor. If we got any less than half a penny, it wouldn't be better than just asking for a flat amount.
So that would be 107.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that would basically return us to what we got in 2009, or yeah, roughly, just less.
Anyone good with math or calculators as to what 150 would then be? That's my guess, is it would probably be like 3/4 of a penny or something like that.
Yeah, I could do it, 150 divided by 215. It's gonna be 0.7.
Oh, not bad. So.
Doesn't
Yeah.
ring as well as half a penny, but it
No,
is,
it doesn't. But you know, the larger point being that a penny on the tax rate is too much for what overfunds it by you know, substantial amount. But you know, 3/4 of a penny gets us to where we're recommending. I think we're kind of getting into. I like that idea of both making a comment that this has been underfunded for the last 2 years. Personally, I would include the select board, you know. Whatever, not trying to read into their reasoning or whoever set the budget or put the budget in front of the select board. But stating that the budget, was funded at 40,000. In 2024, it was funded at 50,000 in 2023. We're recommending reinstating full funding at 150,000 to keep us on target for the goal. This is the equivalent of 3/4 of a penny on the tax rate. It's a long-term investment in the community, etc. That message sounds reasonable to me.
And just to answer, I think it was Dave's, I don't know if it was a question or not, but so everyone knows, the process is, as I've seen it anyways, Eric Wells proposes a budget, and which includes some amount or not for this line in the budget, and then presents that to the select board, and then the select board reviews it. They hear a representative from the Conservation Commission, and hopefully, in the past anyway, they have then boosted that dollar amount up from 0 to, in last year's case, 40,000. That's how I've seen it happen anyway. It's usually proposed at 0.
Eric Wells proposed 0 last year,
The last 2 years, I think.
Eric, and then you were there to represent the request, and then the select board basically gave you 40.
Correct.
Right.
Us, not me, us 40. Yep.
Right.
Yeah, responded to you by giving us
Right.
40.
Right. I mean, hey, that's a pretty good meeting though, right? I mean, one meeting and you get 40,000 for it. That's pretty good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I wish it was roughed in at 150 and the select board had to decide to cut it if they were gonna cut it. That would be a much better situation.
Well, I'm sure the budget's not gonna be any better this year. I mean, just anticipating another knuckle dragging fight over costs and everything else. I'm sure it's not gonna be an easy one, but we can continue making this request. How do people feel about making any recommendations about this penny on the tax rate? We haven't really talked much about it, but now that we know what our ask is, does that change any minds?
Andrew, have you talked to any other staff about whether there's, if Melinda and the housing committee are considering asking, or would be planning commission asking for bike ped?
Talking with Eric, that is Eric Wells, that is the two kind of planning related places that they're interested in, besides this one. So there's 3 total, and it's what you said:
Okay.
housing, bike ped, and ERF. And bike ped isn't, that committee's actually, it's coming along. I don't think it's actually an official town committee, but they are.
It's like a working group or
Yeah.
something, public members of the public.
But yeah, there is support for that. And just to remind you, the explanation that I received from Eric and kind of passed along the last time we spoke about this was that the goal is to have a broader conversation about all of those things at once. And if there's, outreach that's required to do that all together. And so I think it's appropriate for you to phrase it in a, we're supportive of exploring this, and this is our target.
I'm almost wondering whether somebody from our commission should try to connect with somebody from planning and somebody from housing committee and say, can we put together a joint proposal that all of our memos mention? Say, we have had an initial discussion, and we think, because any source of uncertainty leads the select board to kind of spin and then say, well, maybe not. They really like things that they can just say yes or no to.
That's true if we team up.
And so I feel like if we could at least have had a conversation and say, we've had initial discussion with these 3 concepts, and while we don't have a complete proposal, this is how we think it would work out in terms of what funding we're asking for. Between the 3, we're asking for 2 pennies across the 3, or whatever it is we're asking for.
Are those committees meeting on the regular that we could, ask for an agenda item in one of those meetings or all of them? How does that
Housing
work?
committee is, I think that yes, for
Once a
housing
month?
committee, I think so. That's a town committee, and so that one's a little bit more solid. I think that the bike ped initiative sort of, it blurs the line between capital projects and specifically bike ped. And that was another part of the conversation I had with Eric Wells, was that there's also this demand for money for capital projects, and that's, you know, they're thinking about possibly separating that out with a penny on the rate kind of idea, and maybe that would all be lumped together.
Mhm.
And so I'd have to check in on whether or not, I guess I'd have to check in on like the kind of strategy conversation with the housing committee. I'm not sure. Are you saying you meet with them to talk about the amount, like the percentage of that penny
That's what I was,
they're asking for, or what's
like,
the,
whether we ask for 0.7, which would basically be exactly the 150 that we've calculated. We need. Or a half a penny or a whole penny. Really depends on, you know, if, like, let's say that Bike Ped said we need a half a penny a year. And that the housing said, oh, we need a little more than a penny a year. Well, then that might work out perfectly at 2 pennies, just like the select board is gonna respond, I think, better to something that's simple and it's already like half baked, and they can put their stamp on and say, yes, we like that idea. That's just my sense, listening to their
I think
conversations.
I agree with that, and I also think it's an easier sell, like generally, to be like, we want 2 pennies for like housing and conservation. Do you know what, like, or like whatever, like the way that we package it together, like it's all like land use planning, but
Public,
2 pennies
yeah,
for
public,
land use planning or something.
yeah, public infrastructure, basically.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Mhm.
Then I think that's like also select board minutes so often get turned into observer articles, and it's like a much neater thing that could get communicated to the more broadly to the public to package it like that. So I don't know if it actually makes it more complicated on this end, like on our end to do that, or but I do see the value of like the communication value of doing it that way.
Do you think we should focus on our memo, but on the communication strategy of just coordinating our requests with those other committees? I mean, ultimately, you know, it's the town that puts a budget together, and it's not like we, you know, show up as like rogue agents with like a counter proposal to that town. So I would say like only if the town is interested in putting together a, you know, a bundled rate like that. I mean, I think we would be game for it, but our charter probably says like our focus needs to be on this recommendation. I'm personally interested in those other funding sources. I'd be happy to coordinate with them.
I think the answer is yes, though, right? I mean, Eric and the select board have said, well, if people are gonna bring forward this kind of thing. Don't bring forward 3 separate proposals, right?
so the direction I got from Eric is that they're planning on discussing this. And I think that this committee might be getting a little bit ahead of the sort of implementation of that project. And to your point, Dave, like having the select board have that conversation to see if the town is supportive of it is kind of the idea. Does that make sense? I think that the general narrative that I'm hearing from you all is that you know, this $150,000 a year number is the goal, and referencing previous funding and explaining that it is directly related to this 30% by 2050 goal. You can then connect that to the penny on the rate conversation and explain that you're supportive of that, and that you'd like to see that the penny on the rate, if it's implemented, it meets that amount per year.
I think that's a good way, yeah.
Mhm.
I like that line of thought. our ask hasn't changed. This is what it would be for the next year. We're supportive of a penny on the tax rate approach to various funding needs for public infrastructure. And this is how much we would still need that much within the joint thing. Sorry, Eric.
That's okay. I just want to clarify something. I remember having this discussion a little bit last year too, but I think we can have this at the very end of last year's memo. I think the goal is to get the ERF balance to, I don't see it anymore, 800,000 or something, right? Yeah, there it is. Fifth bullet in the memo. The goal is to get to that $800,000 balance. And then the approach that we're proposing is $100,000 to $150,000 a year to get us to 800,000, right? I think that's something that we should emphasize too.
Yeah, Reed,
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Eric, because I actually don't care about the 800,000 number at all. I get the concept, but to me, if we got to 800,000 and the parcel, because the parcels come up at very unknown points in time,
Mhm.
in my view, we should be looking at the entire 30% by 2050. So by 2050, we have to have raised what we think is enough money to conserve up to 30% of Williston, regardless of whether we make all those conservation easements and land purchases in the last 10 years of that, or whether we make them spread out through, like, we don't control when the land becomes viable to conserve.
Mhm.
And so in my mind, 800,000, I actually would prefer to take that out of the memo. I think we should be funding it consistently regardless of what the fund balance is.
I agree. Mhm.
So
It's just
remember that the select board, like we had the Conservation Commission has bought into that 30%, but the select board hasn't yet, unless I'm missing something. That's not in the approved town plan yet.
Right, but
It
we
is
proposed.
state level, right? Like
It's
it
a
is
state-
like we can say like the state has set this goal and it is like also a presidential goal. So it would be, I mean, I guess the town could say like we're not going to participate in that, but it would be kind of weird, right?
state goals are different.
Weirder things have happened.
Yeah, I guess that's true. I'll be right back.
State goals are very different from actual mandates required by the state. You know, the state's not gonna get sued if it doesn't reach 30% conservation by 2030 and 50% by 2050. The state actually is being sued for not meeting its greenhouse gas reduction requirements set by the Global Warming Solutions Act by a point of comparison. So the goal is a good one, but it's not legally enforceable and there's no mandate for the towns themselves to actually follow suit.
Mhm.
It's directional in nature.
Right.
And they're still trying to figure out how to implement it.
Yeah,
However, once that number, assuming that number is embedded in the town plan, then there's some,
Yeah,
in my mind anyway, some teeth behind it that we could stand
Sure.
by.
sure.
yeah,
It's a
That's
good goal. It's a good goal, but you know, I guess the point is that it's for the time being, at least, it's directional. And that, you know, if we wanna be directionally aligned with that, there's a number out there and it. My personal opinion on the 800,000 is that you might as well make it 1 million at this point. Like, I don't know how much that 800,000 has changed. And then what happens when you get to that million or 800,000? Do you want, I mean, and there's
stop
no,
funding
do
it.
you want them to stop, do we want them to stop funding it when we get to 800,000 or do we want to actually spend it? In which case, it just raises a whole host of questions. So I do kind of wonder, like, what is the point of putting that number out there? Is that number even real? It would be real if we had a very specific parcel that we knew we wanted to acquire or approach for acquiring. So I guess I'm just
Yep.
kind of, my mind is kind of going
Yep.
around that 800,000.
Yep. I think so. I think that is in response to a question that, I can't remember if it was who it was, if it was me or Gary or somebody else had to field from the select board,
Mhm.
a while ago what is, are we just going to fund this perpetually? And the tone of the select board at that point was that they did not want to fund it perpetually. They wanted to know what the end game was. What is our target? And that's how we came up with originally that 400-ish thousand dollar target for a balance, to maintain a balance in the ERF. Select board is different now. I think the only person that's still on there from that conversation is Ted Kenny. We could take a different approach now, certainly. But I think that's why how we ended up with this, a goal,
Mhm.
for an ERF balance.
Right. Okay, yeah, I still don't know really. I can appreciate that, just as a point of, just
I mean,
politics, but I
At the
don't
rate it's getting
understand it.
funded, I would say if you just, if we updated it to say, the funding target of $1 million for this time around, we're not gonna get there. So at
Right.
the rate we're getting funding,
Right,
we're not gonna get there, so it's kind of irrelevant, and if the 30 by 50 goal that we're putting into the town plan recommendations goes through next year, we could just remove the funding target item and say, our target is to conserve 30% of Williston, and once we've done that, then we can reassess how much should be going into this fund.
Mhm.
so the current balance is $480,000.
Yeah, so at the current funding rate, it would take 6 more years to reach.
Assuming we don't make any withdrawals, yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
without, so it kind of is irrelevant to me. I see how it's nice for the select board to be like, oh, good, it's not infinite funding, but the whole point is.
The whole
To
point
me,
would
the
be
whole
to
point
use
is
it.
the land conservation is the goal.
Mhm.
And the money is just a math calculation, and what we've done is looked at all of the parcels, we've looked at the highest priority parcels that could reach 30%. And then we've said, how much money is that? And that's $150,000 a year. They may not like that number, but that's kind of what it.
So we have a land cost per acre of. Right now, this graph is showing $2,200 per acre. How many acres do we need to acquire? It sounds like a math problem. How many acres do we need to acquire in order to preserve 30% by 2030 and 50% by 2050?
It's in the paragraph below the chart, so 2,560 acres remains to be conserved in order to reach our 30%.
Am I remembering that correctly? Are those the numbers that we have in the current relevant chapters of the town plan, 30% and 50% conserved land in Williston?
30 by 50 is what we put into the town plan draft.
30 by
30%.
50, okay,
That's
not
what
30 by
I said.
30, okay.
That's we did not go up to 50, right?
Yeah,
No.
okay, that's what I was wondering, all right.
Yeah,
I
30 by
didn't remember
25.
that, because that's definitely not achievable, 50%
Right.
of the town.
We're basically at like 16% right now.
Yeah.
So that number of 2,500-ish acres left is basically half. So we're basically halfway there to the 30 mark.
Okay.
To get there to
Yes.
2050, we
All
need
right.
roughly 20 more parcels at totaling 2,500 acres.
Which
All right,
would
good.
be $5.7 million.
Yes.
All right, there's our goal in 2024 dollar values.
2023 dollar value.
But that's by
23, right.
2050. So between now and 2050, we need to raise
So
it.
how many years is that? 25?
Quarter century.
You're probably talking about it like
230,000. That's
A
one
year.
penny.
Yeah.
That is one penny.
Now you have to take out the 480 we already have in the account, but yeah.
And then there are conservation easements.
And yeah, and then we typically get 50% covered with conservation with with land trusts and others pitching in, so. Yeah, I think 150 is still a reasonable number.
Mhm.
basically.
Okay. Well, that's a useful exercise. I wonder how much of that is too much detail for the select board and what is the appropriate amount. I mean, showing the math convinces, folks like me and Kim maybe, but does it convince a select board with 50 other memos to go through?
Yeah, this one has it in paragraph form. It just says,
I think that $5.6 million number is not.
so it says, we also examined the funding requirements to conserve these 20 parcels, which were just an example of how to get to 30%, which collectively have a current grant list value of 9.1 million. Over a 30-year horizon, conserving them would require $150,000 a year, assuming a 50% match from outside partners.
Okay.
So
Mhm.
the cost per acre is an average, and when you actually look at which parcels would be valuable, it came out to 9.1.
I do not remember us looking at 20 parcels last
Well,
year.
that was 2020 analysis.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, so I wasn't here for that.
yeah. We basically just pulled up the map and said, or Melinda, I think at the time was here, she pulled up her thing and said, well, what combination of high priority parcels would reach 2030? Okay, I mean, these ones add up to, they're getting us to 30%.
Right.
How much do those parcels cost on the grand list? 9.1 million.
That's kind of wild. That is almost twice
The average.
the average.
Of course, that average is gonna increase year over year, so today, it's whatever. 220. Sorry, 2,200
Plus or
per
minus,
acre, but
yeah.
in 20 years, when we're trying to conserve something, that's gonna be a higher number, so that may be. Something to think about too.
And it'll be more difficult too, as far as there will probably be more pressures on the town, people moving in.
Yeah. I'm thinking that paragraph that Reed just read out loud needs some updating. Because it's not a 30-year horizon to 2050 anymore.
25-year.
It's a quarter century, not 30 years.
Mm.
We've also had pretty extensive conversations in the time that I've been here about not wanting to target specific parcels because it can make people feel like they're being called out.
Maybe better to do it the way you did it, which is just to say
The
cost per
average,
acre, this
Right.
many acres.
right? We can, then the sentence above, the top 20 most valuable parcels were conserved. I don't know that we need to say that. We could just say at the current rate, 2,560 acres need to be conserved in order to meet the target.
What does everybody else think about that? About moving away from talking about example parcels that'll get there toward just acreage?
Yeah, I think that's. I think that's a good way to do it.
I'm just like imagining the conversation at the select board and wondering if like if there should be like a separate piece of paper that somebody could have in front of them in case the select board is like, do we even have you even imagined what that configuration of land would look like? Like, you want this many acres, but have you identified, like, I can imagine someone asking that
that's true.
question. So
I think
like,
that
would we
I
just
think
have it as a backup to answer the question?
if you cite the 20 most valuable parcels, you are very much inviting that question. I would think that Eric is off camera. I'm not sure if he can answer this, but like, I wonder if in presenting this for the last 2 years, did the select board actually ask what that map was?
And it's really more of a scenario than a plan, so
Yeah.
I would actually rephrase it, if we were gonna keep it in, rephrase it to say, in order to validate our estimates, we ran a scenario looking at 20 highest priority parcels to conserve that would reach 30%, and they are valued at 9.1 million as of 2020. So, you know, just to kind of saying it's one scenario that could get us to 20 to 30% as a way of validating the acreage calculations.
Yeah, that actually makes me feel better because there are a lot of ways to get to those
Yeah.
acres.
But
Yeah.
also
There
the
are.
permutation,
I agree.
we just looked at the
Yeah.
most highest priority based on our prioritization list.
Mhm.
Yeah. I think the general math of, you know, if we go with 2,500 acres as the sort of, I think that's better to say is the target. Like, I think we need to conserve 2,500 acres by 2050 in order to meet this 30% goal. And the rate is, you know, 202, whatever that number is, the rate, the
2,200 per acre.
2,200 per acre at 2,560 acres equals roughly this amount at 50% match. That's why we have come to $150,000 funding request per year. However, as a point of, you know, proof of concept, we looked at what actual, you know,
Grandless
values are, and it comes in at 9.1 million instead of 5.6. It's, you know, it's a little bit more expensive, but proof of concept, I guess. It's reasonable. I think that's what we would characterize as it's reasonable. Eric, if you're back, a question came up. Were you ever asked by the select board what those 20 valuable parcels would be?
No, I don't know that we got into that level of detail.
Yeah, they never got to page 3. They never
Yeah,
got.
no, I was gonna just kind of as a joke, but threw out the idea that maybe the memo is just the Williston Conservation Commission is requesting X dollars be deposited into the ERF this year, period. Thank you very much. To be done with it.
Truly.
Well, that's why we underlined that top sentence. That's what that is, Eric.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Like, maybe we just stop with the underlined sentence.
Right.
That's as far as they're gonna read.
This
Yeah, I
week in
think
class, I have groups of students that each took an academic article and they got one slide in 3 minutes to summarize, like one PowerPoint slide in 3 minutes to do a whole paper, like lightning talks. And there's like part of me that's like, maybe this is just how we should be communicating broadly, like less words, pretty pictures,
Right.
Yeah.
one slide.
I was actually gonna ask whether it was too modern to do an infographic for those bullets at the top instead of the bullets. Like
I
2 for 1
think it's
and
happening in all, I mean, like I would defer to the group, but like I have lots of journal articles now that have a requirement for a graphical abstract, and it's basically that.
yeah.
Mhm.
So I think I'm not sure that it's actually informal or modern. I think it's like pretty, I don't know.
Good communication.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
well, we are in very different worlds, Kim, because my most recent writing was referred to in the press as painfully turgid this week.
Nice.
So
Good for you.
I get a gold star next to that filing.
Nicely done.
Yeah. So this is more my
Okay, but I
speed.
feel like you got to save that. I have a collection of like bad journal reviews, and someday I'm gonna turn them into like performance art or something. Just like reviewers have written that have been like, okay, did someone rear end you on your way to work this morning? Because that was like unnecessarily cruel.
I was
So I
just
feel
happy
like that
someone
goes
read
in
it.
that camp of like just put that in a drawer and someday.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
the
for
title
sure.
of whatever I do is going to be There Are Too Many Problems, because I have a colleague who got a review and the first sentence of the review was There Are Too Many Problems. Like not even like a nice lead in.
All right, so we are coming to an end of this agenda item, but I think it was very productive. I think we got a lot of ideas for updating this. On this topic of an infographic, I don't know if we're gonna get to resolution on, but, I do think that the graph was a huge step forward for us last year. I really like the inclusion of it. I think it tells the story. And I think there could be an evolution to that. There could be like a takeaway from that. How do we feel about noodling on that for the next week or so and then, spending maybe half the time in the next agenda?
Mhm.
And then maybe in the meantime, we can maybe make some minor edits to some of the wording and the organization of this memo pursuant to this conversation, but then think about this infographic as a possible concept to build on this graph. Sound
That
good?
sounds good to me. If we're gonna keep the graph, I would just request that we look at the label for the y-axis and make that the same as what we have in the title of the graph. I don't know if it's land cost per acre or land value, but make them consistent. Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Okay, great. Yeah, there's two y-axes, so that's why that's why it has a
Just gotta
double
update that
title value.
right-hand y-axis or the title, one or the other.
Mhm.
Right, sorry, the second y-axis, yep.
So I was taking notes on paper for much of this conversation, and then I kind of shifted to commenting on this document. Would it be helpful if I summarize those comments in this document and then send this back out as a Word document?
Sure.
SharePoint has kind of been a bit of a struggle, I think.
Yeah.
So let me know, would you want to do SharePoint, or do you want to just look at Word documents?
If SharePoint works, it's definitely better, or a Google Doc if SharePoint's not working for us. If we are only if we are gonna do edits, like as a committee, collective editing. I think that's if you're just asking for input on like, are these notes reflective of what we talked about? Then I think just circulating it as a document is fine.
I agree, yep.
Eric, did you write this last year?
I think yes, I wrote it. I can see if I can dig it up. You should have the final version in Simon's files too, but yeah, I'll see if I can. Isn't this a Word document that you have up?
Yes, this is the final version. I'm wondering, as far as, I think it's appropriate for the committee to write this, to be drafting it, but I wanted to make sure that was
Yeah.
done.
Oh, sorry, I see what you're saying. Yes, I thought you were wondering if I have the original copy, but yeah, I agree, Andrew. I don't think it's I mean, you can help us, but it's something that the committee should be driving. Yeah.
So
I agree with that.
I can set that up in SharePoint if you want, so that you can edit and look at it.
Let's do that with your notes.
Yep.
Because there were a couple paragraphs there that I think we did as a committee want to sort of explore. I also think some of the wording around how this gets incorporated as that, penny on the dollar kind of rate. I like where we landed on that, and I want to just make sure that we're all on the same page, that we want to ultimately make this request based on what the need is, which is the number of acres, and then make that comparison to the penny on the dollar rate as a point of like reference, and if the select board wants to go in that direction. I think that's where we landed, right?
Yeah. I would be happy to volunteer if we decide at any point that we want to make contact with the other committees about the penny on the tax rate concept and what they're thinking about proposing.
Yeah.
In their memos. I'd be happy to do those conversations, but I want to only do it if it's something that the
Right.
commission as a whole wants to move forward with.
And I'd be happy to do that for the pedestrian committee.
Mm.
If Because if there's three committees, you know, we can't go to all three of those.
Yeah, I think it's just two others, it would be
Yeah.
like Ped. Is there a planning commission member who's working with them? Or just staff person working with them?
I know Melinda has been working with them a bit. Yeah.
And then the housing, oh, if Linda's working with them, she's already working with housing.
Yeah, I think. Like, I guess I'm. Trying to see if we can achieve what you're trying to achieve by talking to the committee, by just, like, I can ask questions.
Okay.
And I might also be able to ask Eric, which would be really helpful.
Mhm.
You're wondering what the total ask would be, is it 2 pennies, 3 pennies,
Mhm.
what's in play, and from that, then. Thinking about your ask individually, right?
Yeah, I also don't want to be zeroed out, right? And that's where I think there is a little bit of just,
Mhm.
I'll be blunt in saying it, there's friction there,
Mhm.
right? Where if we put this memo out for the last many years and the town manager read this memo and put the request in at 0, like that's not exactly a confidence building exercise, right? So that's why the individual communications may become necessary at some point.
Right.
But I hear
Yep.
your point.
And
Clearly.
to that point, maybe talking with Eric might be a option for you as well.
Yeah.
As a chair and
I-
you know, yeah, Eric's accessible.
I support that too. I don't know. Last year, our goal was to get this to the select board before Eric drafted his budget. This is dated December 21st, so I'm not sure we met that goal, but so I think I don't think it's fair to say that Eric read the memo and then put it in at 0. I'm not sure the memo would have made any difference, but I do agree. I think it would be helpful to have a conversation with Eric, either Dave as chair or with the whole committee, one or the other, either when or before we submit the memo to the select board.
Yeah, the whole committee might be a little much, but maybe Eric, since you are the previous chair and you're most familiar with the sort of history of this memo and what the recommendation comes down to, it could be you and me or me and Kim or something like that, or
Sure.
whatever.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, let's keep our options open and spend more time on it, in 2 weeks.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was good. Okay, then I think, and we've got some, participants. I imagine you guys are here for Glazer.
That's right.
Okay, great.
Please feel free to
Yeah.
join us at the table.
I'll be right back. I need to get snacks.
Thanks, Kim. Andrew, do you want to open this up, to set the table a little bit for the commission?
Yeah, so the commission received this request to discuss the requirement for an HDA on the Blazer property. The memo I submitted has quite a bit of information. But the memo is a draft. Hold on. A draft memo from this commission to the DRB. And I had included some messages between staff and the representative Brian. And Brian, if you want to introduce yourself too, I think that's appropriate.
So I'm Brian Courier, project engineer for the Glazer project. I've been involved with the proposal since we started the specific plan process, probably a year and a half ago.
At least.
So
Almost 2 years.
it's been a very long-standing project that I'm been involved in for a long time.
And so Brian did share with me kind of a succinct summary of his request. Let's see if I can. You have it right in front of you too. You could just read it, but I was just gonna try to.
Essentially, our request is we would just like the Conservation Commission to consider providing a recommendation to the DRB that very simply says, does this HDA that's been completed already for the project meet the intentions of the revised bylaw amendments that my understanding occurred within the last year? So I've been to a number of these meetings in the past. My understanding about the changes in the HDA requirements is that the committee was, let's just say, skeptical that HDAs kept being performed and not a whole lot was coming out of them, is my understanding. So what happened is they transitioned the HDA bylaw. So instead of the developer hiring a private entity to perform the environmental studies, the town would then hire the environmental agency to perform the study. So where this one I feel is different than potentially other projects you've seen in the past, or which is more in line with larger projects, is this is under Active 50 jurisdiction. So as part of an Active 50 project, generally the first thing we do is after we get a sketch plan approved from the town, which we have with the DRB dating back to last November, not to mention all the specific plan processes that were done over the last year and a half. We reach out to the Active 50 folks for what we call Active 50 letters. Now, this includes comments from Fish and Wildlife, VTrans, Agricultural Foods and Markets, Vermont Department of Historic Preservation, and we make sure that we're considering any studies, recommendations, buffers, any natural features that these folks feel are design constraints. You know, finding out about those things after you're already done a full preliminary plan set, roads are designed, you know, utilities design, traffic circulation design, that can throw a wrench in things. So we start really early in that process. So that was our goal over the summer. So we reached out to the Active 50 folks. We did receive comments from the Department of Fish and Wildlife. Basically, there's two habitat protection scientists that review Active 50 projects in District 4, which is generally Chittenden County. That's Andy Wood and Noel Dodge. They reviewed the parcel, and they not only reviewed it for grassland bird habitat, but that is what they required from us. They asked us to conduct a bird survey. Essentially, A&R has guidance, which is I think important. They have a guidance document that basically says how that survey is to be conducted. So that's a document that's prepared by the state. It's not a opinion of the consultant that we've hired to conduct the survey. Essentially, you have to visit the site. I believe they can only be done in 2 months out of the year, essentially the nesting season for grassland birds. So they asked that the study be conducted on the site. We hired Fitzgerald Environmental to visit the site during those 2 timeframes. Basically, the report that they put together is included in your packet. You know, they noted various bird species, but primarily what they felt was grassland bird habitat was isolated to the northern side, or the side of the parcel along Mountain View Road. There's a Class 2 wetland complex that kind of.
Sorry, you're pointing to a map that is not part of our packet here.
Okay, do you have a plan at all?
Thanks. Yeah, I was curious too, what was on there.
I think any plan would work, Andrew.
Yep. While Andrew's pulling that up, is Fitzgerald Environmental is that a firm that we have used, familiar
Yeah.
with?
Yeah, we've worked with them a lot on a bunch of different projects here in town.
Thanks, Eric.
So I guess while he's pulling that up, the bird survey, so it's a 100-acre parcel, 35 acres of primarily wetlands was being dedicated to the town on the west side or south side, mostly forested, but also some of the pasture land, or primarily the pasture land associated with Windswept Farm. There's a Class 2 wetland complex, kind of that in the middle, that split. There, awesome. So this is the map I have in front of me. So the pod of development on the left side or south side here, the horseshoe, is a grass field, but due to impacts of the farm, proximity to the pasture land, the topography, Fitzgerald Environmental didn't recommend that area warranted protection for grassland bird habitat, but the northern half they did feel. So that's the area that's shown in pink here. So this is a map that was prepared by the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department. So after receiving the memo from Fitzgerald Environmental, we had a site visit with Andy Wood, Noel Dodge, as I said, the habitat protection scientist from the state, but also Jillian Kilborn, who's a bird habitat specialist. So those three folks, along with Jen Mojo, she's the A&R coordinator for Active 50 projects, the four of them and a group of us from our team, including Fitzgerald, we walked the site and we did a third bird study. So after that walkthrough, Fish and Wildlife agreed that the southern area didn't constitute impact to significant bird habitat, but they also agreed that the northern part did. So once they made the determination that the northern half did have adverse impacts to bird habitat, they have a guidance document that talks about offset impact fees. That was part of the email that was
That is
sent
in our
over.
packet.
It was drafted by Jen Mojo, but it was copied from the Fish and Wildlife Department. Basically, they look at direct impacts being where roads, homes, rec paths, where those things are being built as direct impacts, but they also look at indirect impacts, which is a proximity around those uses. That's the pink area that's shown around all the yellow highlighted development portions of the project.
Right.
And on top of that, they look at indirect impacts. So there's direct impacts, proximity impacts, but then indirect impacts, which is whatever's left is that large enough to constitute grassland bird habitat. And in this instance, the answer is no. I guess the general rule of thumb is they're looking for about 20 acres.
Mm-hmm.
So we would fall short of that 20-acre requirement. So essentially, they're looking for impact fees associated with the entire northern half of the development portion of the parcel, from the class 2 wetland complex in the middle, split into two pods of housing, everything on the Mountain View side. They're looking for impact fees. So essentially, the way they come up with their impact fees is A&R is starting a program.
No, the memo, sorry. I don't see it in my packet.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So A&R is they're starting a program that essentially developers pay to in the fund, and I'm sure there's other sources of income also, but they essentially pay farmers and people who own grassland bird habitat, open fields, to cut during certain times of the year. So there's a pool of money there, and based on how much they get paid per acre, and I believe we have to do a 2-to-1 offset ratio. We have to pay into this fund for a 30-year time period. They calculate a fee of roughly, what does it say?
$84,750.
So in order for them to make a undue adverse, or adverse but not undue impact, we would have to pay into a 84,000. We would have an impact fee assessed of approximately $84,000 for the project. So in my opinion, the study was, yes, the two original bird surveys was done by a private consultant hired by the developer, which is, I understand, the town's trying to get away from. But it was verified based on a site visit with the Agency of Natural Resources. In my opinion, very competent, very, very professional, very experienced in these sorts of matters. I think, very high bar. By no means are they a friend of developers. The offset impact fee that's proposed as part of this report, I'm not aware of anything similar that the town has ever done in these sorts of situations. Now, there could be other projects I'm not aware of. But all these things, combined, we would just like the consideration of this committee of, does the work that's been done meet the intent of the habitat disturbance assessment that's been amended within the last year? I understand that in the bylaw, essentially the only piece of it, I think that's called into question by staff is, a sentence that talks about, it being a town commission study. Now, I don't know if consideration was even discussed at the time the amendments were being proposed, whether or not the Agency of Natural Resources or, another public entity, not under the control of the developer, not being financed by the developer, would meet that definition. I've been doing development projects, not just in Williston, but Cheney County for a long time. Very rarely are bylaw documents written in such a way that they described every scenario that the
Yeah.
real world can produce. So generally speaking, planning and zoning and these committees try their best to meet the intent of the regulations. So in our opinion, we're meeting the intent. But we're starting with you folks, as we know the change in the bylaw, started at this committee. I understand the reasons why. Ultimately, it's the DRB's decision, but we're looking for a recommendation or an acknowledgement that the work that's been done up to this point either meets or exceeds the intent of the habitat disturbance assessment.
So Dave, if I may,
Yeah,
I'd like to just briefly summarize the draft memo, which is explaining the situation, which I think Brian did aptly. The draft memo is from this committee to the Development Review Board. On your basically, it's drafted in a findings and recommendation style that the DRB is very familiar with. And that I'm looking for guidance from this committee on that. Would you like to adopt or draft changes to this memo to then submit to the DRB? The sort of, I don't want to read this verbatim, but basically the summary of, there are significant habitat or wildlife habitat areas. The HDA change that Brian described, the habitat disturbance assessment was required at the time of pre-application by the DRB. And the bylaw does allow the DRB to waive the inclusion of one or more elements of the HDA, but there's no outright waiver that the DRB or the administrator can provide for that HDA.
so the project then is going in for pre-app. And the current recommendation, even pursuant to the specific plan, is that the HDA must be conducted as part of the pre-application.
So the pre-application has been reviewed already,
Okay,
and as part of that pre-application, the DRB provides recommendations to the applicant. One of those
I
recommendations
see.
was to complete the habitat disturbance assessment,
in time for what part?
the discretionary permit.
The discretionary.
And so the applicant then has a year to file the discretionary permit.
Yep,
And so that is where that's standing. The recommendations that have been drafted, just finish this and then I'll stop talking.
you're doing great, Andy. Thank you.
Yeah, the recommendations are as drafted. In summary, there isn't a clear outright waiver for the HDA, but staff as part of this draft has recommended that the materials prepared by the applicant could be submitted to a biologist to use as part of their assessment of the property. And yeah, so I'll leave it there.
And I'm reading these recommendations. And
Andrew, could you put them up?
Oh,
yeah,
sorry.
that'd be great. Go ahead, Eric, I see your hand.
Thanks. So just a couple thoughts on this. I guess I was wrong, but my understanding when we put that bylaw together was that any state permitting requirements that are more stringent than what the town has would supersede any local requirements. Personally, I'm fine with the Act 250 requirements. I think they've done their due diligence and working as closely with A&R as they have. I think that meets the intent of the bylaw. And I would say that the offline or at another time, perhaps the Conservation Commission can talk more broadly about this concept and how to address it if and when it comes up in the future. I think I heard where Andrew was going. I guess I would propose um, an alternative in that if we have to have a third party or have to have a separate HDA completed, then perhaps the town can hire a third party consultant to just evaluate the assessments that have already been completed rather than doing another full habitat disturbance assessment. Thanks.
Thanks, Eric. I guess I have been on this commission for about a year and a half, and the part where we get, from my perspective, the part where we get asked to review these HDAs is the point where the commission can then review the findings and engage with the developer in a meaningful way to suggest that changes to the plan be made. And I guess that's what I'm not hearing or seeing from either the map or the state impacts. And so I guess where at that point does your state permit, or I mean, your state review allow for either this commission or the DRB or the town to engage with you as here's what they found, can you address that in your design to mollify the impacts based on the findings of the habitat disturbance assessment?
So I'd say similar to the wetland rules, the first step on things like this are, can you do your project somewhere else? All right, so the specific plan process started on this project a year and a half ago. It's a 100-acre piece, 35 acres is being dedicated to town, which the intent of that is to then create a lease with Windswept Farm to keep their pasture land and their use continuing. Another 15 acres along Mountain View Road is being proposed to be dedicated to town as well, to preserve a view shed. And who knows what may be the future of that land with the town. So it's a long-standing project with a lot of moving pieces. As far as doing it somewhere else, when we had that discussion with Fish and Wildlife, essentially the pieces we brought to the table, aside from this specific plan pieces, is this is in the town sewer core. There's very few parcels undeveloped within the town sewer core where density can be achieved at this level. The town is in desperate need of housing. Just on the other side of Mountain View Road, you're in the ag rural zoning district, and nothing like this under current zoning would ever take place on the other side. So we have public infrastructure aside from the sewer core, Mountain View Road, Old Stage Road, public water, Vermont Gas, whether that gets extended or not is a question these days. But Green Mountain Power is also on both of those main arterial roads. So given access, utilities, and the biggest one nowadays is the sewer core. Those are all major points of why an offsite impact fee was the recommendation of Fish and Wildlife rather than looking at design constraints. I mean, like I said, the majority of the parcels already being dedicated to maintain a working landscape and to preserve a view shed and any future considerations the town may have. So in my opinion, the design substantially is already pared down to the point where we're looking at, I think the proposal is 107 dwelling units at this point. But, if you look at our specific plan, I think Gary was your representative during that point. essentially all the boundaries have been drawn where there's not a lot of shifting to do. I mean, if you were to avoid impacts to the northern field, you're essentially getting rid of that northern pod there, which
That's what I was gonna say is basically that's your only option would be to reduce or eliminate the northern
Right.
Cluster.
right, which given what I was saying about public access, utilities, sewer core, if these units aren't built in a dense manner here, I think well, many people are aware of the housing crisis that we're in right now. If they're not put here, they're going to be spread across the countryside, long driveways, clearing, outside of Williston, acres and acres of land. So in my opinion, from a planning perspective, put the units in a dense manner where they should go and don't spread them across the countryside. The housing restraints in this area, uh, you know, and we need to be dealt with in an efficient manner. And we feel that this proposal does that substantially. An impact fee of $84,000, for grassland bird habitat impacts is in my opinion, substantial.
Where's the 84,000 gonna actually go, Andrew?
State fund.
Yeah, so it goes to a state fund where it's an incentive program to farmers or other folks that hay grassland bird habitat, basically, cleared areas of the right size topography. The birds don't like a lot of elevation change, and they don't like close proximity. So that's where the 20 acres comes into play, generally flat. But if you meet the criteria, and that impact fee is for a 2-to-1 ratio. So if we're impacting 15 acres here, they're going to be conserving 30 acres somewhere else. Basically, that fund pays these farmers to hay their field during certain times of the year where grassland birds are not nesting, where otherwise they would, be doing 3 cuts a
The
year.
town doesn't get any of it, right? That's the,
Unless we have parcels that.
A farmer in Williston could receive that basically to not hay is the idea.
Until late in August.
During that,
Yeah.
And in fact, we have discussed trying to get enrollment between Patrice Maloney's field and Catamount Outdoor Family Center in a very similar program that was run out of UMass, and we never qualified for it. So it is conceivable that the town could partner with farmers, like the person that does the haying at Catamount and the Maloneys, to apply for something like that in the future. So I think the town could, right? We could see the benefit of it.
So I want to direct you back to the memo to the DRB, and Brian did bring up the point before about kind of how state federal regulations may apply in reference to this bylaw. And I wanted to just bring up this section for your reference, so you're aware of it, where it mentions that where state and federal regulations may also be more restrictive than this bylaw, the requirements of this bylaw and those regulations apply. That's what's stated. And then going back to the memo, I'd also like to clarify to Eric's point, sort of about the redundancy of these efforts, that the draft memo, share it. You look at number 3 and 4, that this work does not need to be duplicated by a consultant, and that they would basically determine if it is sufficient. The DRB does not, number 4, have the authority to completely waive the requirement of an HDA.
So, and I think to be clear, we're not asking for the HDA to be waived. We're asking for the commission to determine whether or not they feel that this study that's been completed meets the intent. And then we would ask them, the DRB, do they feel that, this study meets that criteria? So I don't feel that we're asking for a waiver necessarily. I see it more as are we meeting the intent of that bylaw provision or not?
Reed, and then I have a question for Andrew.
It seems to me that the bylaws 27.5.7.4, the one that talks about what a habitat disturbance assessment must include to meet our things, as I read through that. It just seems like, there's a lot of really detailed work been done. It just doesn't cover the full spread of what our HGA would ask for. It is a weird situation because site design is not. Adjustment of site design is not a likely outcome. It would either be removal of units to increase connectivity or reduce impacts on core habitat and bird habitat. The thing for me that I would hope to get out of a supplemental review that looks beyond what the assessments have looked at so far would be what other species are using that. For instance, that is on our maps, it's a travel corridor in addition to being core habitat. And there is additional habitat to the west that is accessed in theory by wildlife species through that same area that the grassland bird concerns are. So for me, if we did need HDA and the HDA came back and said, yeah, in addition to the grassland bird concerns, there's also these other wildlife impact concerns that might sway whether I would recommend, yeah, just paying into the state fund that's sufficient, or that perhaps development is not suitable in that northern pod. So I would like to see an HGA that looks at everything that's not already covered by the existing studies. Which is my
All I would say,
opinion.
all I would say to that is A&R brought grassland bird land habitat to our attention for more study. But I mean, we've done deer wintering area assessments with them, vernal pool assessments. I mean, they cover it all. This is just what rose to that level of we need more.
So
Right,
yeah,
so I was just gonna
yeah.
echo what Eric said, which was like, this is an Act 2 study, Act 250 study, right? Like this is probably more comprehensive than what we would have done.
Okay.
Just
It sounded
just
from
like-
the draft memo, Andrew, as though you felt, staff felt that it was not comprehensive of everything that's required in our HGA. Or is it only the town hiring the consultant that's different?
There's the requirement for the town to hire a consultant. There's not really a judgment in there on the depth of the study. I think a benefit of what I'm hearing from the commission is that having more information about the entirety of the study, in addition to the grassland bird information that's been shared as part of the Act 250 process, is something that you're interested in. Your idea is that might better represent what is required of an HDA in the bylaw.
Or that Reed is saying, it's really hard to know if we feel confident in that the assessment would be in the spirit of what we were hoping for, because we can't see everything that the biologists looked at. And I think what Eric was saying was like, it's an Act 250 review, it's gonna be solid, right? Like the state does these all the time. We can trust their process. So I think
Sorry, Kim, go
go
ahead.
ahead, Eric. No.
Oh, it was Dave.
I think
just
I see
to
Eric
support
unmuting.
Kim. Yeah, sorry. Just to support Kim. That is what I was saying, and I would say, I guess just to follow up on that, I think it would not be unreasonable for us to have an opportunity to look at what was done, and provide some our own comments and feedback on the work that has already been done. But I think it'd be an unnecessary expenditure of resources either by the applicant or the town to hire to have another HDA completed.
We had a lot of questions when this specific plan was being proposed about the areas that were going to be deeded to the town, both for connectivity of future pathways. There was discussion about, making a connection there to the Northridge subdivision, other neighboring properties. I think that,
but this question is just, does this Act 250 review supersede our need for an environmental assessment. Like that, all of that is valid, and it's not the question being asked of us right now, right? The question being asked of us right now is, do we need another environmental assessment? And Eric and I are saying, given our knowledge of the Act 250 process, we don't see that being valuable, but perhaps the entire committee should look at what the Act 250 report revealed. That's just
The
the question.
results. The
Yeah.
results.
Yeah, I'm supportive of that. What I saw in the memo and the attachments didn't cover what I would expect from HDA, so that's why I felt like I
Exactly.
couldn't opine on
Right.
Yeah.
on it, but so seeing the entire study I might have a different opinion.
I'm more than happy to clip the HDA requirements out of the bylaw. Send them to the Fish and Wildlife folks and say, has your review of the parcel meant the intention of these pieces? And I'm more than happy to share that with you.
So Andrew, your recommendation, back to the sort of task at hand, is to have a town contractor review the assessment for completeness and then make a recommendation to the DRB for if it meets that completeness. Is it going to answer the types of questions that Reed and I had? Kim and Eric seem convinced that it will.
So the process for hiring a separate biologist would be what we normally do, which is explaining the project and explaining the request for what needs to be included in the HDA to meet the bylaw requirements. And so the staff proposal here is that that would be sent out. This is what we need as part of an HDA, and that the materials shared by the applicant would also be included in that. And so it's I think very similar to what you're describing with sort of wanting to see the study as a whole, the Act 250 study as a whole. You'd be having a different biologist do that, and I think that the staff recommendation is that would, well, I don't think it is. The staff recommendation is that that would meet the requirement for a town hired consultant to complete an HDA on behalf of the town as opposed to the applicant, which there's no clear waiver of that. And it's sort of a unique situation here with an applicant asking for consideration of that requirement. So that's how staff has approached that request.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. But can Fitzgerald be the person that you ask, because they've already done a lot of the work?
It's a good question.
I mean, why wouldn't they? If they've done work with us before, and then a lot of the need, they could say, yes, we met these requirements.
I think I would direct that question to the committee on if you'd be okay with that. I think that
question.
The intent that I've heard from the committee on the bylaws, that having that contract through the town, between the town and the consultant is, kind of the powerful thing that,
Right.
they're answering, to the town and ultimately to this committee as opposed to the applicant. And so.
If we can be efficient with our resources and the town's time and utilize them through a contract with the town, and that's fine. But having some really be a fourth party review at this point,
Right.
is something that we felt was worth being here today. So
Eric has his hand up, just so you know.
Oh, thanks. I didn't see it. Eric? is your
No,
hand-
that was a reflection of my indecision as to whether or not I wanted to comment or not. Go ahead,
Well,
I'll
go
think
ahead.
about it.
Okay, all right. Well, yeah, I mean, this is it's an interesting question. I guess the sort of comes down to, do we have enough information? We don't see the full information to have the sort of conversation that we would like to have, or at least be aware of, for the parcel. So I'm but I can appreciate that it seems unlikely that the Act 250 document is gonna fall short of the information that, the types of questions and discussions we were having during this special plan discussion.
It certainly raises that we need to discuss what to do in these non-standard situations.
Right.
Because we didn't foresee this happening.
I like staff's idea very much, but I also wonder if getting a letter from Fitzgerald, given their experience, to say that, testing in, so to speak, that I don't know, that could
What's-
be an interesting,
This is a kind of interesting question. Was the Fitzgerald assessment done prior to the change in the bylaw?
No,
It was done in,
Soon after.
the study started in July.
yeah, so the bylaw amendment was last fall.
I'm just curious, like what the timing was.
So-
So I was wondering, like, if it happened prior, could we say, you know?
Well, and the
Pre-
pre-app condition piece of it are written the way they are, as they should, because we didn't do this till the summer,
Yeah.
you know, so I think that's pretty.
If the committee's comfortable with it, I'm thinking through, kind of on my feet and I'll take a closer look at it. I'm seeing a possible situation where the, town goes to Fitzgerald, and requests, the requirements of the bylaw be reported as a habitat disturbance assessment.
In that format, yeah.
They would obviously have the, other materials that have been included in Brian. I think if you could provide additional Act 250, anything that they have on, the other review they've done of that parcel.
Mhm.
That's something that the committee is interested in. And basically have them create a report that has the materials that are required. The only, town requirement that I can think of that, would kind of throw a wrench into having Fitzgerald do this as well is our requirement to contact two biologists. And so to meet that requirement, I could probably contact I would need to contact another biologist. And then the town would also ultimately make that
could
decision.
A&R be that other biologist?
Probably not.
Provider.
Eric did raise his hand, by the way, so I don't know if that if you have more, Andrew, or if you want Eric to respond.
Basically, the town could go out and ask for this requirement as is drafted in the memo.
Yeah.
And one of those consultants that we could contact could be Fitzgerald. And we make a decision on how to proceed.
Yeah, so the biggest piece of the habitat study was the grass and birds, right? I think we all agree with that. You can only do that during a certain time frame.
Yeah.
So if you went out to two and the second person was chosen, basically we're stuck till July of next year. That's when the grass and bird habitat assessments start. So you know,
So
I think it's a little.
but we don't wait for grass and bird season for HGAs generally. I mean, if whatever season they're able to get out and they believe they can get a good habitat and species inventory.
The bylaw is vague on the timing of the habitat disturbance assessment, and in the past, we have deferred to the biologist on what they're comfortable reporting. Feeling that they provided a complete report. I'll also add in the decision on what biologist to use, we're looking at availability of the biologist to provide a report. The timing that they can do that in. Ultimately, you know, the applicant doesn't have a say over price. But, you know, that is also not a super defined decision-making process that occurs. But if the committee's comfortable with Fitzgerald leading that report, then
We could see if
they
they're
can be
available.
considered for that, to prepare the habitat disturbance assessment.
Okay, yeah, we'd be fine if the town wants to reach
Eric?
out for
So-
availability.
Yeah, thanks.
Oh, you're on mute, Eric.
Sorry, I hit my space bar by accident. All right, so yes, I've made up my mind now and I will comment. So I guess my thought after listening to this is that given the relatively high profile nature of this project and the level of interest from more broadly across the town on this project, I think it would be in the best interest of the town to recruit a third-party consultant that's independent of Fitzgerald Environmental. Fitzgerald Environmental does do a lot of work for the town, does great work. We stand by it all the time. However, I think we need to honor what we have in the bylaw and recruit a third-party consultant to review the materials that have been compiled by Fitzgerald for the Act 250 requirements, provide a report to the town that follows our typical HDA format that we are used to and comfortable reviewing. And then, and the applicant is contending that the Act 250 assessment is more rigorous than the town requirements. I tend to agree. But if there are gaps that are identified, then we know that and can make recommendations at that point in time. And those gaps are identified by a third party that's not directly connected to the applicant.
Thank you, Eric.
I'm in full support of Eric's
Yep.
comment.
It does sound like Eric's comment is consistent with the staff recommendation, right?
And I mean, I don't want to sound insensitive to, we do have a housing crisis. This project has taken a long time to get to where it is today, and I'm sure for everybody on the applicant side, it's like, when can we get this to the next step? Because there's a lot of steps to get through. But there's a reason why we have the bylaws, and there's a reason why we've decided to make a change in how we do our HDAs. And I really hope that all the work that's been done accelerates how quickly we can get an HDA completed in the format that we're used to and presented in the way that we're used to cause as little delay as possible while still meeting requirements. And Eric's point is not lost that this is a very high profile project in Williston, and I think especially in those circumstances, we have to be mindful of following procedure.
I agree, Reed, with everything, and we'll just add that this is the solving that housing crisis in Williston is not the charge of this committee. Our charge is to evaluate and uphold as best we can the bylaws that affect the environmental aspects of the town, not figuring out housing. That's we provide our feedback and advice to the DRB and select board as needed, and then they take that and factor in everything else that's happening out there in the world. Yeah.
Yeah, no, we're just here to point out the redundancies,
Yeah.
ask for consideration, and
And the redundancies are well received. I think we need to have a larger conversation
Yeah, I
about
agree.
whether there in the future we can prevent this situation from reoccurring. But right now it is what it is.
Okay, so Andrew, do you have what you need? Is this memo sufficient based on this discussion? I'm not hearing any direct edits being proposed by.
I would just
Any
move
members?
to approve the findings and recommendations as drafted, because that also, everything Eric
Mhm.
proposed seems to be in line with the drafted recommendations. Do you agree, Eric?
Yes.
Okay, so there's a motion to approve the memo. Someone want to second that?
I'll second it.
Great, thanks, Eric. All in favor of approving the memo?
I,
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion carries.
Did Kim aye or did Kim abstain?
I
I
I
thought I
decided,
thought I saw her hand as an aye. Great, Andrew, I think great job on the memo.
Thanks, Brian, for the presentation.
thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben. All right, next on the agenda, we have a update on the Jacob Krantz parcel. But I haven't seen anyone from Winooski Valley join the meeting.
Correct. Yeah, I'm ultimately that just fell through the cracks.
Okay,
I can provide the update today. So Tim and I went out and walked the parcels last week, which was great. We actually walked it with a couple of their staff as well. We walked down the main trail that terminates sort of right at about the northern end of the parcel. And then we walked down around the banks of the Winooski as well. Not really on trails that are existing.
okay.
It's in pretty good shape. There are signs that people have been cutting blowdowns and kind of clearing things, which is
Wow.
great.
Maybe we've got some future trail stewards in there.
Yeah.
Right. And so we felt comfortable with, as far as conditions of the trail, proceeding.
For the ninth.
For the ninth.
Yeah.
There are a few small details that, just given the timeline, we're confirming. But I've begun to advertise the event and have gotten a little bit of interest just via email. So it is scheduled for the 9th at 4 p.m. We're meeting at the gravel lot that
Proposed parking.
the Global Foundries gravel lot there to walk in. And Winooski Valley Park District will be in attendance as well.
The meeting materials contain a nice brochure, flyer,
Oh.
whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, happy to throw that.
Maybe that was not in the emailed one, but on the online.
It's on the online version, yeah.
Oh,
So, Andrew, where is that posted?
So I've done a front porch forum post. It's also posted on the main natural resources page on the town website. And as I'm saying this, I'm reminded that I would like to put it, try to get it up on the homepage as well. I will follow up with Aaron this morning because we did discuss that.
okay.
But if you click natural resources, it's up there. Right
Nice.
now, I didn't want to bury it.
Yeah, I think homepage is
Yeah.
for sure.
Unfortunately, I was not able to get it out to the Observer in time to make it to this week's issue. Which is sort of the timing of all of this, and I'm hoping that we get some community members out there. If we can get a critical mass of this committee as well, I think that would be great.
I plan to attend.
I plan to be there as well.
Yeah, I will also.
Excellent.
Great.
Well, Andrew, what were the invasives like when you and Tim walked?
We actually didn't notice that many.
Okay.
I'm trying to remember the name of, there's what are the pricker bushes that have the very small kind of almost round leaves?
Berry, Japanese barberry.
I think it was barberry.
Yeah.
There is barberry along the trail in places. There are little pockets, but it isn't that significant. It's a really cool piece of forest. I didn't study forestry, relatively inexperienced on that front, but walking through there's some massive poplars and some variation that I think could be really cool when there are trails throughout that parcel. So
Poplar Park.
It's a popular place to go.
Oh, I like that.
Oh, boy.
I love
Great.
um,
No, that looks great. I'm sorry that we missed the Observer. I think there'll be other opportunities though, for sure. Yeah. I mean, if these go well, why not have them more regularly?
mhm.
If it really isn't good enough condition. When Simon and Tim and Nick and I walked it, it was surprisingly good condition. It was the only thing you had to worry about were ticks.
Yeah, I really like that it's not super wet, that parcel,
It
which
is. Yeah.
we have so many wet trail networks in Williston. It's so nice to go somewhere and you're like, wow, this is like all upland, rocky,
Yeah.
high, dry.
Yeah, it's right on a ridge.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were talking about names on our walk, which
Of course, it's gonna go there.
I think, the only thing I was gonna bring up on this topic was, I think, Chapin mentioned to you, Andrew, that, there's, two members of the planning commission, Chapin and also, Shepherd, Mr. Shepherd, Steve Shepherd, who are going to be meeting, with a, Abenaki representative who's been determined to be reliable for this area. Anyway, about other things, including interpretive signage for Abazima Nahanik, and he just wanted to make sure that this commission was aware that they're gonna be talking to them about interpretive signage and things for other Williston properties, and they'd be happy to, if we had something we wanted to ask them. Like, for instance, to verify that there's no specific naming for the Jacob Krantz area that those folks are familiar with, they'd be happy to bring that ask forward, or
When's that meeting happening?
I don't know exactly, sometime soon. I know they're trying
Okay,
to schedule.
why don't we
perhaps.
get an update, I guess, on the when that's scheduled, but I think mindful of the time.
Yep.
I did just want to say that our upcoming meeting, so far the agenda looks good. Note that we've got a Park and Recs review chapter coming up, so that's gonna be substantial. And then I did want to just flag that November 6th is the day after the election. A lot of us, myself included, will probably be up very late the night before. And I have another complication where I may actually be going to Boston later in the day, and so this meeting's looking pretty optional from my point of view. Borderline may not be able to make it from my point of view, at least. How do other people feel about the November 6th meeting? Is that something that, barring any like time sensitive topics, do we need to have it? Do people want to just cancel it outright? Do we want to postpone it a week? Andrew and I would just wanted to have that conversation with all of you.
Sure. We could also consider moving to the 13th, meet on the 13th and the 20th that month,
Mhm.
and then not
Yeah,
Thanksgiving week,
just pushing it back.
1 week.
Yeah, so that would be the 13th and 20th, right? That's one option.
Either of those, either or any of those options sound fine to me. We could also do a half meeting, start at 8, run from 8 to 9 on the 6th. Unless that runs into your travel plans to Boston, Dave, but any of those work for me. I need to head out. So just keep me posted on what you decide. Thanks, everyone.
Maybe we can
Thanks.
decide next meeting.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like unless we have something really urgent that needs like review and approval,
Okay.
we could probably just cancel it, honestly. I mean, if we get far enough along in this ERF budget memo where maybe we don't need to meet at all.
Yeah, I won't be here.
Okay,
The
great.
first week in November.
All right.
Okay.
Hope you're
Sounds
voting
like-
absentee then.
Oh, you better believe it.
Sounds like we can pretty much.
I
say we
can't
won't
even
see that
imagine
before.
not voting.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll adjourn this meeting and table the 6th unless something comes up that is time dependent.
Okay,
Sounds like we've
just
just,
confirm at the next meeting.
yeah, yeah. Thanks, Kim.